you're never 100% ready for a go live.
It doesn't matter if it can't be done. It has to be done. Okay, I mean, jumping right into it, talking about data migration. And to be clear, Matt, this is not your data flying south for the winter. This is like permanent. And I'm only using that because of all of the thumbnails that we looked at the other day where like
Yeah.
there's birds and stuff. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't even make any sense to me,
Clip
But
art for the win.
right. So anyway, we're talking about converting your data from whatever your existing platform is and getting that into Profit 21.
Right.
And look, for me, this is the foundation of your house. This is the site work. This is pouring the slab, and everything else you do in your Profit 21 implementation is going to be built on top of this foundation. And so I really believe in getting it right. And that usually means it takes longer, but I don't know, man. I see so many people that just want to rush it. And it's like, dude, you're making decisions that are going to affect you for the next 10 years.
Well, and there's some decisions you can't change once you've made them.
Right. No, absolutely.
Inventory costing is by default. Once you set it in transaction, there's no changing.
No, absolutely. So yeah, I think, we can walk through an overview of what all these things are that we've seen. We can talk about the process, and we can get into some of the places where we see customers stepping on landmines, where we've stepped on them ourselves, because we're doing 12 to 15 of these a year, and none of them are easy. If they were easy, they would be insourced.
And we've been through them as
personally,
end users ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so high level again, migration. Data, we call it data conversion internally, but the internet seems to refer to it as data migration. So, for the purposes of making this searchable, data migration. But we're going to say conversion a lot because that's our lingo here.
They're interchangeable.
They are interchangeable. And so, we're talking about pulling data out of your existing legacy system, preparing it to go into Profit 21, and then ultimately loading it into Profit 21. And not all migrations or conversions or whatever, they're not all created equal, and there's different types, and we see those a lot, and people have a lot of different ideas about how much data they want to bring in, what's important and what isn't. And there's been times where I'm like, gosh, I can't believe you're leaving all that out, but in their instance, it really makes a lot of sense. So for me, Matt, I think the two biggest ways to classify conversions, especially the ones that we've been involved in, are either this is a new P21 that's coming up from scratch, right? The customer is moving from a legacy system onto Profit 21, or the other, and I don't even know, it's probably 50-50 for us. I don't know.
With our customer base, it is. Yeah, it feels that way.
The other would be, it's a result of M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions, right? So people have an existing P21, and now they've bought a company and they want to bring that acquired company into a P21, whether it's the same database they're in. Is it going to be a branch of the same company? Is it going to be its own company? And every one of those, like, those decisions should not be made on a whim. They really shouldn't. You really need to look at how you're operating the business and what makes the most sense. And if you don't know, ask somebody. It doesn't have to be us. I mean, hey, we're happy to help you with that, but ask somebody. Get some advice if you're not sure what to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Matt, just thinking about this topic in general, like right off the top, I think there's a lot of misconception about what you can do and what you can't do. And I don't think I want to say that it's getting worse because there are multiple ways to host P21, but there's definitely divergence. Like things that we've done for customers that are on premise. A perfect example is where you used to work, right? We wrote a lot of custom code to bring in manufacturing routings and
process fees
process steps and get
yeah.
all of the costing figured out and all of that. And it was a really big lift. But because of what you guys were trying to do and the scale that you were trying to do it at, it totally made sense to do that. That's not like a standard P21 import that you're just going to
No,
do.
Unfortunately, there's not.
Yeah. And it's complex because of the, it's a one-to-many relationship or whatever. So not, just because you see it in P21 and it's a screen, it doesn't mean that there's an import screen for it. We've had like the big ones that I can think of that we've done multiple times. Process routings, process steps and routings. That's a big one. PO history. We have customers that want their closed POs to be imported, and there's not an import for that. That doesn't mean there's no way to do it. Well, maybe it doesn't, maybe it doesn't. We've done it for on-prem installations. I don't think we've ever attempted it for a Epicor hosted public cloud. But even if somebody brought that to us today, if we couldn't find a way to get that data into P21, I know how we would do it. The problem is it would come with a cost, because now we have to have this bolt-on database sitting out somewhere that's accessible, that can be read from. So like all of these things are ultimately accomplishable, if that's even a word. Is that like misunderestimated? I feel like that wasn't good. But it's like, how much money do you want to spend and what's it worth to you? Because it's everything that you want to do with this is going to take time, and which means it's going to cost money, and you need to make sure that you're getting the benefit out of it. And that kind of leads into our next point, but it looks like you had something you wanted to jump in on that one.
I mean, on that same, as far as what you can and can't bring into P21, I mean, there are going to be costs associated with it, whether it's having to keep up a server and maintain a server that has your legacy data, having somebody build a data center for you to house all that stuff. Bottom line is you just have to decide what's worth paying to keep around.
And that really is going to be extremely business dependent. I mean, I had
somebody yesterday.
Yeah. And one of my first customers, actually, I think it was my second customer. They ended up selling out. They're not even a customer anymore. But when they had been live for 6 months, and then they found me, and this was back when it was a one-man shop. But they were very small, 10 or 12 users, but they wanted 15 years, I think, of invoice history brought in, sales history. And
that's a lot.
It's a lot. However, the products that they were selling, a big part of their customer service was their customers. So basically what it was they would supply these tooling packages, and they would supply all these sort of like custom weird parts and stuff to machine shops and fabricators and manufacturers that were doing like these special projects. And so a big part of their customer service was based around the idea that, hey, our customers can call us and say, hey, we cut you this PO back in '06.
Mm-hmm.
That customer 15 years later came back and they want to buy more of that. We need the tooling for that again. And if we don't have the tooling, can we get an equivalent? And that's why they needed that history.
It's the same. It's almost the same conversation I had yesterday with a customer, because they supply stuff to people that build homes.
Yeah.
And they need to be able to go, hey, we built this house 12 years ago. Can you tell us what flooring we used?
Yeah.
Or whatever they used.
And I think one of the challenges is, and we're rolling right into the speed versus quality conversation here, which is the next thing that I wanted to talk about anyway. But I think for me, where I get frustrated when I see data conversion going sideways is most of the time it's being farmed out, and the entity that it's being farmed out to is just they're fighting them tooth and nail and telling them, oh, you don't need this. Oh, you don't need that. Hey, we say that all the time, but we also try to have the wherewithal to understand they're asking for this because it's part of their company's competitive advantage. The one that comes to mind, Matt, was a couple of years ago. We weren't even involved in the data migration. We were involved in every other aspect of that implementation, but not data migration. I don't think we could have handled it anyway. We would have just collapsed. But at the very end, at 0 hour, they need to bring 10,000 quotes into the system, you know, and it's like everybody that was working on their migration it was that the migration was being split up between 3 different external entities.
Oof.
Like, talk about fraught with disaster, but
Yeah.
whatever, that's where they were. You had one person doing the extraction. You had another person that was external, like massaging data. And then you had a third entity actually doing a load into P21. And so anyway, this company, their whole thing was they would quote these projects, they would go to their suppliers to get special pricing for those projects, and all of this would be tied together, their sales pricing, their margin, all of it was wrapped around their ability to quote these jobs and track these special deals with their suppliers.
Mm.
And so they're saying, hey, we need to bring in these 10,000 quotes, some open, some closed, because we need that history to feed back the data to our suppliers. All 3 of the other entities are like, yeah, that can't be done. And we're like, it doesn't matter if it can't be done. It has to be done.
Yeah.
And that was the one part of their data conversion that we got involved in was, hey, we'll figure this out. We will find a way to get those quotes in. And we did. It took 2 forever. It was 100,000 quote lines. It was actually over 100,000. I think it was like 120,000 lines. And we had like 8 hours to get them in. But they're in. And, whatever. So, a lot of times I feel like, and this is a terrible part about being in consulting, right? It's the part where you really don't want to be the guy that's causing the go live date to be pushed off. I mean, you just don't.
Mm.
It's like, let that be someone else's fault that go lives
Mm-hmm.
be. I mean, breathe the sigh of relief when it gets pushed off, but just don't be the reason for it. That's sort of the whole game. And it's the problem with that mentality, in my opinion, is people make bad decisions, and they aren't being straight with themselves or with their clients about, guys, you're not, this is not going to work. You're not ready for this. And we've had that conversation, and sometimes the customer has been like, yeah, you're right. This is what we're going to do. We're going to punt. We have customers that run 2 sets of books on go live date. There's what they think it's really going to be, and then what they tell everyone else it's going to be, so that they can keep people motivated. And I totally understand that. And then we've had it go the opposite direction, where people say, we understand your concerns. We're hitting this date, period. And, we'll look at each other like, oh my gosh, why are they doing this? Well, then an M&A happens, 8 months later, and they're like, that's
Yeah, I mean,
what this
sometimes
was
there
about.
is external
There's
forces
stuff.
pushing on it.
Yeah, there's just stuff. But I think, when you're going down this path, whether it's because you're doing an acquisition or whether it's because you're migrating to P21, you've got to make some really clear decisions. What's a decision? You've got to make really clear decisions about, are we going to do this quick, or are we going to do it right? And that's not to say that quick equals wrong,
Right.
but quality of execution to me is extremely important, and at least understanding where you're at on that spectrum, because it's a bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
You can be ultra fast, or you can be ultra quality and never get it done. And we've seen that. We've seen go lives that drag out 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen go lives that or we've seen implementation projects that go on for like 5 years and get scrapped. and it never comes to life.
We've seen people print dates on cups
Yeah,
and
and
and go a couple years past. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's there's got to be a balance because the too fast, any of that time you're saving, you're going to be eating that time up with mistakes and things you didn't know after you go live, which is way worse than taking the time before go live. But at the same time, we've seen people that, it's like the old saying, like, I'm not going to have kids until I'm ready to have kids, or I can afford to have, which you're never going to have kids then,
yeah,
because nobody's ever ready for it. You're never 100% ready for a go live. It's just there's going to be, and we'll get into some of these conversations later. There's going to be things that got slipped through. People stepped on some landmines. Um, but there's a balance, right?
yeah,
You don't want it to take 10 years, but it's not going to take 30 days either.
yeah. That's correct. And it's here's the biggest one that I can think of right off the top of my head. Right, on deciding speed versus quality is like, oh, we're not going to import orders. Your people are going to enter those on go live day, and that's how they're going to learn the system. I'm like, are you nuts? I mean, you're.
They'll learn a lot that day.
Yeah, and so will your customers, right? So
Yeah, your customers shouldn't feel the data
no,
conversion.
all of
That's the
your
biggest goal.
yes, all of your internal stuff that you're dealing with, that should all be backstage.
Mhm.
None of that should be customer facing. And so I don't say I won't. I'm not going to say I giggle when people are like, oh, we're going to put these 1,000 orders in. I'm just like, oh man, because it's going to be the worst 1,000 orders that go into your system. It's
Right.
going to be the ones with the most mistakes, the most things that have to be unraveled. People aren't going to understand allocation or how to change the source location ID or any of that. And so you're going to leave all of that to chance. I just, to me, I don't get it. But, again, nice segue into the next point, which is how are you even going to manage a data migration project? And what does that team look like?
Mhm.
How do you make those decisions? Matt, I mean, you have personally been through this and were very much at the forefront of it. What was your experience with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen on your management team for this process. But you got to find a nice right balance. My goal was always, it's not always the IT people for data conversions, and I think a lot of people fall into that trap of, oh well, this is an IT project, it needs to be all the IT people. Obviously, the IT people and the data people are going to be involved, but what you really need is your business experts, your people that actually, what I call Uber users. Every company has one or two people, maybe more, depending on the size of company, that that if something goes wrong in your current system, you're calling that person saying, "Hey, can you help us figure this out?"
Yep.
Those are the people that you need to recruit onto the team. Excuse me, to help facilitate this project, make sure you're going the right way. And then there needs to be, and I always recommend an internal person being your project manager, and it doesn't have to be a typical, but just because they know your business and they know, yeah, this looks right. There needs to be somebody that's funneling through internally, externally, that is, say, following up, making sure that this person has entered in this core data or has done these tests, and take those reports. Um, be ready for weekly meetings. I mean, this is not something you can hit go and then check in 6 months later. Um, and it's
Well,
tough
yeah,
because people have
and
real jobs to do on top of this.
absolutely. And the problem is this. You've got it, Matt, you nailed it. This is a line of business function. Like the leadership of this needs to come from line of business. It should not be coming from the tech side unless you have a tech person that came from line of business that
Right.
understands it. Now that obviously is an exception.
Right.
But it's not about, the whole trick to getting this right is not about making sure the invoice costs match up. Like anyone can figure that out eventually.
Math is just math.
Right. What you can't figure out is, okay, we're loading customers. There is no functional equivalent in our legacy system to these 15 points of data that P21 is expecting. How are we going to set those? Acceptable wait time, default order disposition, default packing basis. I'm just picking those three because those three settings drive how you're going to treat your customers in
Hmm.
P21 by default. They just do. They drive when pick tickets are going to print and when they're not. They
And there's no
drive.
right answer because
There's
everybody's
not.
business is different. There's
Yeah,
no.
and if you've got 1,000 customers, you should not be setting all 1,000 the same way. You should be looking at least your key accounts, those that are driving the top, those 20% of your accounts that are driving 80% of your sales. You should be thinking about how should we be setting this for these customers. And I mean, that's one of 1,000 puzzles that will come up during this process. And, you know, I don't know how we're doing this because we're kind of free forming this discussion, but we keep walking right into the next point, which is how much of this is internal versus how much of it is external. Now, I've got thoughts on how you decide when things should be externalized to a third party. And mine are really based around capital cost. You know, this is if you're doing a new implementation, you're bringing your company from a legacy system to P21, it's pretty much a one-time event. So how much time, like, you got to put some of your best people into this. How much of their time do you want to sink into that could be used for other things that are going to be recurring versus just hiring somebody and paying whatever it costs to get this one event done as quickly and as correctly as possible? Or the other side of it is, hey, we're going to do this, but we're going to be doing this every quarter because we're going to buy a company every quarter. There's a case to be made that you should have that ability internally.
Hmm.
Um, there's a case that to be made to do it internally when your legacy data is so messed up and so hard to get to that no one's ever going to be able to understand it. I don't think you should make that decision in a vacuum. Certainly let someone look at it and see.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have a case going right now where the customer is in two different systems. Half their company, or a little less than half, is in one more modern system. Um, the other half is on a half dozen different versions of a very old legacy system, and each of those versions has its own nuance. And we split the difference and said, look, we're going to migrate you. We're going to get you onto P21, and we're going to do all the branches that are on the modern system, and then we're going to help you come up with a process to figure out how you're going to get the rest of it done, because we'll just eat up. I mean, we roughed it in. We figured it would be $300,000 or $400,000 to get the rest of their branches on, just because everything was going to be hyper manual.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple points that I wanted to. One, just heating off of that, this is an investment, and it's you can't drop $250,000 on a new ERP and then expect to implement it for $10,000. Whether you're using internal resources or external resources, it's going to cost you money.
Yeah,
Um, Something else to keep in mind, when you say external, there's no such thing as 100% external, just because we don't know your company. We can't map out all of your fields and whatnot, but you're going to spend that time doing that anyways. It's all the other time saving stuff that, because when we do our data conversions or migrations, whatever keyword we're using, um, we've gone through it half a dozen times before go live.
yeah,
Like, we just keep pulling the data and rerunning it. Okay, that one worked. That one worked. Let's move on to the next data set and move on and move on. So hopefully by the time go live goes, it's just
yeah. We've already done it
go
10
live.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we know the data is going to load.
Yep.
And I think when you look at farming that out, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a consistent process. What you're really buying, you're not buying someone to extract and load your data. I mean, you are, but what I think you're really buying is the knowledge and experience of the system that you're going
Right.
to know what questions to ask, to look at your data and understand where are the holes between where we're coming from and where we're going to, and what questions do we need to ask to get those gaps covered.
Yep.
That to me that's it. And so
Mhm.
that's what you're looking for in a migration experience. if you externally resource it. That's, I mean, my opinion, everybody's got theirs, but that's kind of where it is. And I'm not, look, yeah, if you want to put something in the comments, send something on our website, get us to look at your project. We would love to do that. But that's really not what this podcast is about.
Mm-mm.
This is really more about, here's our experience with it. And
Yep.
and this is what we think you can expect.
Yep.
So great. Let's talk about the process. I think that is probably the next biggest thing is like, okay, we get it. We understand like conceptually at 50,000 feet, what it is we want to look at. What does it look like to actually do it? I want to spend a minute just talking about like new implementation, like you're going to P21. I think a large part of the audience will be that, and maybe a large part will be we're adding to our existing P21. If you're in a new implementation, you've got to go through the blocking and tackling of figuring out your system settings and then setting up your core data, and also realizing that those system setting decisions are subject to change. You'll get halfway into it and figure out, well, this probably isn't the way we want to do
Some
this.
of them.
Yeah.
Some of them. Some of them you can't.
Some
But
of them you can't go backwards. That's true.
you know, just be
Um,
aware.
but there's a lot of what we would refer to as core data that, for the most part, you can't import. You're not going to import a company. You're not going to import branches or locations. For the most part, you're not going to import users. If you've got thousands of them and you want to dump them into 6 buckets, let's talk. But if
Yeah.
you got 40 and all of them wear multiple hats, you'll do more damage by trying to do some trickery to copy users
Well,
because not everybody's going to fit the same blueprint.
right. And honestly, I wouldn't even, if I had a company with 100 people in it, I'm not putting all 100 people in right at the start until
Right.
I really understand. I mean, we've done videos and conversations on setting up users. There are so many
Oh, there's
toggles
got
and
to be
checkbox.
over 100 different
Yeah, and
options.
they keep adding to that application
Right.
tab. There's just more and more stuff that gets added on there.
Yeah.
So,
And some of them
um,
are extremely meaningful, like the ability to see cost, the
well,
ability to create a customer
I mean, the user maintenance screen is 50% of your security for
easily.
P21. The other
Easily.
one is screen designer or Dyna change, menu designer, but that's the only place there are permissions because there's no permissions on roles really.
Yeah.
Um,
Buying
there-
limits,
yeah.
stuff like
So,
that. I mean, it's important. The ability to administrate screen changes, for example, is a big one. But,
um,
and it's not our goal to get into the weeds and all that stuff.
yeah.
These are just like, hey, it's impactful. Um, Once you get through that process, and understand, okay, we have all of our sales terms set up, our bank accounts are set up, or this or that, all of that stuff that we're not going to be importing. That's your core data, and then you have static data, which is not really static. It's just not as dynamic as dynamic data.
It's not
But
transactional data.
right, static data are your master entity records, items, customers, vendors,
So, yeah.
suppliers, customer part numbers, job contract pricing, things that don't change every day. As Matt said, they're not transactional. They're
Yeah.
supporting transactions, bins, stuff like that. And then you have dynamic data, which is going to be your transactional stuff, your open sales orders, open purchase orders, open AR, open AP, inventory. Those are the big ones. And then you've got some historical data that you can bring in. That would be things like invoice history is really the biggest one.
Yeah.
And what's called item history, which is just how many of this item did I sell in this month for the last n number of years.
Which to me is the most important.
It's critical because it drives
Yeah.
purchasing,
Right.
and it gets overlooked a lot. Now everything is
Yeah.
min max, okay, but chances are you're going to want that data.
Which we have 7 hours of live streams about purchasing.
Oh,
Go watch that.
absolutely, yeah. If you
If
it
you
is
need a nap.
yeah, if you need a nap or you have insomnia, we would
Yeah.
absolutely point you in that direction. So when you're thinking about those big data sets, your customers and suppliers and your items and all of this, scoping, figuring out how much data are we going to bring in. Now, we've seen that go to opposite ends of the extreme rather. We've seen people say we're cutting this off if you haven't bought from us in 2 years. you're not coming into the new system. There's good reasons for that. One reason is if somebody's not been a customer in that long, they need a new credit check anyway.
Yeah.
Now, there's a couple different ways you could look at doing that, but what I would say is the first most important thing to drill down on, and I think Randy from our team will appreciate this, is how much invoice history, because that drives everything. Invoice history is
And if
going
it's
to drive it.
detailed, and if
Yeah,
it's detailed invoice history, which is
right.
a big thing.
So the your invoice history is going to drive what customers you need to support those invoices, what parts are there, and then by extension, since parts are coming in, what vendors and suppliers have to come in just to support the invoice history load. And then you can do things like say, okay, well, we're going to bring those customers in, but if they haven't bought in 2 or 3 years or however long it is, we're going to bring that subset would come in as a prospect. And then that way they're there, but they can't buy anything unless they go back through a credit check or whatever your internal process is for that.
Yeah. And this is where it goes back to, for me, the team that you build around making these decisions. Um, Somebody personally that I fought for. I'm a big proponent of new data base. I want it clean as possible. Now, we gave a couple examples on why it makes sense to bring in 20 years of invoice history for customers. So somebody needs to make those arguments. But like one thing that I fought hard for in my implementation, and I won, was ship tos. We had ship tos that only got used once, and we had some customers that had 2,000 ship tos.
Yeah.
And we had people pushing back on just the chance that somebody may use one of those. I'm like, well, we'll just add it as we need.
Yeah.
So I'm a proponent of, if you really don't just go, because you're going to have that person sitting around the table that just says, we'll bring it all in.
Right.
And if they can't give you a business reason of why we need to bring that in, they just want it, then you need to have some internal conversation. Now, again, if that person owns the company,
Different story.
you better make a really good case.
Hey, when we went to P21, we brought in every ticket that we had ever opened.
Right.
Now we use service orders to do all of our ticket tracking, and so we brought every closed ticket ever, which was 4 or 5 years worth of stuff. It was over 5,000 tickets. We brought all that in as service quotes and then just closed them. That worked for us, but I wanted to be able to use our search to go back and figure out, hey, what I just used it yesterday for a customer that we hadn't talked to. We had done one project for them. We had not talked to them in 3 years, but they wanted to get on the phone and talk about something. And I'm like, I know we did a project for them. What was it? And I was able to at least look at the title of that project and go, funny enough, we were importing routings.
Yeah.
and so, so that's important to us because we
Right.
want the customer's entire lineage. There's a business reason for that. And I own the company, could just make that decision as Matt alluded to. But, point being, sometimes there's a good reason for it. Sometimes there's not. And he's absolutely 100% correct. You have to have an adult conversation about that and come to a consensus. Because the more you bring in, the more you have to cleanse.
Yep.
Or potentially have to cleanse. Now,
Well, that's weird. That just kind of rolled right into that.
I'm getting better. I'm getting better. But
Grace will be
data
happy.
cleanup. Sometimes we have customers do it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they should. I mean, it is potentially a part of the project. If you have, a bunch of really nasty data that needs to be cleaned up, addresses are incomplete, or this isn't right, that isn't right, credit limits aren't right. Like, it truly is garbage in, garbage out. And what I would say is, though, I'm not going to say the worst thing you can do, but the way that you do it that's the most fraught with opportunities to mess it up is to try to fix it in flight. After you've extracted, but before you've loaded, if you're trying to make those corrections in flight, you're going to have problems more than likely, unless you have an unbelievably good process. You really either want to fix it at the source or fix it after the fact.
Yeah, going I'm a big proponent. It may be more work, but fixing it in the legacy system, whether it's going through and deciding these are now deleted partner, whatever you're doing, or renaming your item IDs. Because again, yeah, you could do all that stuff in P21, but again, I'm a proponent of clean in
I
if
am.
that possible, but it's not always realistic, right? Like
It's
that.
not, because some of the legacy systems, you don't have any backend access. There's
Hmm.
no mechanism to do things in bulk. But like if you said we want to go clean up customer addresses in P21, you could probably pull a lot of that off with a mass update. If you needed to
Hmm.
fix a bunch of item stuff, you can pull a lot of that off with pricing service. And so,
Hmm.
while it's what I would say is this, when I'm talking about cleaning it up after the fact, I mean after load, but before you release the general population into the system. I'm not saying, oh, we'll get to that a year from now. No, you won't.
No.
No, you won't, because you're going to have a million other problems that you hadn't even thought of yet. And we've had so many customers say, "Oh yeah, no, we're just going to handle that after go live," and it's been 5 years and it's not handled. And it's never going to be handled. So this is your one shot to get it right.
Hmm.
And if you're gonna clean up after load, that's perfectly acceptable, but it's got to be after load before go live. It just has to be. Otherwise, it won't get done, and it'll be harder to do. Like
Yeah, once you get stuff in there,
once you
it
have
gets.
transactions and all this stuff floating around, it's gonna be really, really, really tough. So,
Yeah, because the data does some weird stuff with item
it
renames
does.
and stuff like that.
And the other thing too is, on the subject of cleanup, is also what we call rationalization of data. Now, this is more of a problem when you're doing like M&A activity and you're bringing stuff into an existing P21. But we've also had it where it's a new P21 and it's two different entities coming from two
Coming
different
into one,
legacy
yeah.
systems going into P21. Or it's going to be staged in, like there's five of them that are all coming together into a single P21. Like there's going to be cross up with suppliers, most likely. There's going to be cross up in the customer base, most likely. Um, People are going to have different item IDs for the same thing. And you've got to, if you've got that problem, you need to think about, like, how are we going to rationalize this data? Someone has to go through. I don't want to hear AI. I don't. I just don't.
We had somebody that tried that
Yeah,
and it did
they
not
did,
work
and it
well.
and it
They
exploded.
they
You
called
know.
us back and go, yeah, that didn't work.
Yeah. No. Really. Okay. Someone's got to be able to look at that data and figure out, oh, this 3M is the same as that 3M. So we don't need to create that supplier. We need to cross-reference that supplier ID in to the second company's data that's coming in. Or, hey, we've got it could be rationalization within the same company. We have 5 customer accounts for the same customer because it just got messed up in our legacy system. We need to figure out how we're going to merge all that down into a single customer. Those are a lot of different things. Or we have 5 customers that are all on an island in our legacy system, even though they're all related, but the legacy system has no concept of a corporate customer and P21 does. What do we do about that?
Yeah.
Again, it's the foundation of your house. All of that stuff needs to be flushed out and figured out. And then, that external parties are typically going to do a really crappy job of rationalizing your data because they don't know your data. I mean, they can probably pick out a lot of the obvious stuff or give you some pointers on, we think these things,
Yeah,
but for the most
here's
part, this isn't
2,000
common.
items that we think are similar enough that you need to
Take
verify.
a look at it. Or,
Yeah,
hey, we did some heuristics on your customer account names and these all look like they might be related.
fuzzy logic.
Yeah. Um, Once you get through all of that, now, I mean, we're like 38 minutes into this, right? And now we're just to get to the point of starting to talk about dragging data out of the system. And that, I think that's actually really great. 60% of this conversation has already happened, and we haven't even talked about actually getting data out of the system yet. And that is true. 60% of this is preparation and decision making and managing and having a plan.
Yep.
Once you get through all of that, you have to figure out how you're going to get your data out. And we've seen that happen a number of different ways. We've had to pull it Some of them, it's a SQL Server based system. Great, no problem. We can just dump the data and start figuring it out. Some of them are legacy systems that are 40 years old, and it's very hard to get data out. Or, you hope they have an ODBC driver. For us, we're so staunch on connectivity that it's part of our estimate. It's part of our quote. Like, hey, everything we're telling you we can do is highly dependent upon this point. And if you can't provide us with some sort of connectivity to your data, we're sunk. We just are. So anyway, that's a big deal. When you do that extraction, is that extraction clean? Is it happening the same way every single time? You know, Whatever the case may be. And then when you get to that part, you hear the term ETL, and everybody throws it around about as much as they throw around AI or cloud or machine learning or whatever the buzzword of the day that somebody's trying to sell you is. ETL just stands for extract, transform, and load. And so extracting, that's pretty simple. We're pulling it out of the source data. Transforming it means now we have to take it in its current state and flip it into something that the destination data source is going to accept, in this case P21. And transformation can be a bear. That's where the migration's made and lost, Matt. It is. I mean, you and I personally spent an incredible amount of time on the phone during your go live to figure out the transformations. It was pain. Yeah, not because of you. It was painful.
Well, definitely not because of me, because I wouldn't be here if it was because of me. Yeah, I mean, and it's not even because it's even been painful going from one P21 to another P21 because not all P21s are created equal. So you really have to know what you're doing with that data and where it's going to go, what you're going to use, what you're not going to use,
Yeah, for sure.
product groups, item class, however you're going to use that data from your legacy to here. Again, it's what we said. We spent 60% of this time. It's all about planning. That should all be figured out by the time before we even connect to your database. You should know, other than us verifying we have connection, before we extract. How about that? That should be figured out.
Yeah. Like we get into a lot of, P21 is used predominantly by industrial distributors, right? And industrial distributors buy other industrial distributors. We very commonly do P21 to P21 data conversions. Or, the acquired company was also on P21. Maybe it's 5 versions back. Maybe it's 3 versions ahead, whatever. And everybody's like, oh, this should be easy. It's P21 to P21. No, because your companies use P21 in totally different ways. Your product groups are their discount groups, and your class 1 is not even a class to them. Yep. Or they've got 4 classes that they're using that are all critically important to them. Or, hey, guess what? Their system setting assigns lots this way, and yours doesn't. And they use extended lot attributes, and you don't.
They're FIFO, you're Mac.
Oh, as an example. Yeah. So they're almost harder because there's so much data available and you want to get it all in there, but you have to rationalize system settings and suppliers and vendors and all of these things. And it takes time. It just takes time to figure all that out and get it right. Again, I keep saying it. It's the foundation of the house. It's going to set the tone for how well your go live is going to be and how frictionless you're going to be able to operate on P21 for years. I mean, you make this decision for a decade or more. People don't change ERP systems every 5 years, or they shouldn't.
Because if you've been through one,
you never want to do it again.
Yeah.
And yet here we are doing them every day. That really probably doesn't speak well for us. But anyway, so that is a whole big thing, is transformation and how consistent you can be with that. And then it actually comes to loading the data. And some things, there are multiple ways to host P21 now. You could still do it on premise, and that has nothing to do with whether or not you're on the web version. There was a lot of confusion about that back in the day. I don't know if it's still as bad as it used to be. I don't feel like it is, but web
doesn't have to be physically in your building either.
Yeah, right.
On-prem just means it's a server that
you control.
You control, whether it's through a third party or through physically sitting on your floor.
Yeah, and so when you're on-prem
or rack, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. When you're, I just caught that. Uh, when you're on premise, you have full unfettered access to the database, and that can be meaningful because I'm not saying anyone should just be inserting and updating and deleting data out of P21, and you shouldn't because there's probably close to 3,000 tables in P21 right now in the database, and um,
That sounds like a landmine.
it definitely could be.
Yeah.
But with people that have done it and know what you can and can't and should and shouldn't do,
Hmm.
it can be a benefit because you can get stuff in there that you couldn't otherwise get in there. Or you can automate getting a lot of stuff set up. We had a really long conversation about line of cost yesterday with a client, and like their biggest hang up to landed cost was the amount of data entry that was going to happen to get it set up, which, hey, we can help you alleviate some of that safely because we've done it. Now, if you don't control the servers and you're cloud based, it is technically still doable if you have the API, but it is way more painful and it's slower,
Hmm.
and it's going to be significantly more expensive to do stuff like that because using the API to do keystroke simulation, that's slow and painful. It just is.
And again, that's Epicor hosted, web hosted, not
Yeah, and
not cloud hosted. Yeah.
we're not bagging on Epicor. I mean, we're
No,
just this
we
is
have a lot of customers that are hosted by Epicor.
absolutely, and we totally understand a company's decision to want to go that route. Um, most of the time, sometimes we don't understand it at all, but and we're not anti-cloud and we're not anti-on-premise. We're what is the best fit for you as a customer? We've got
Hmm.
clients out there, they've got a dozen users, zero customization of their system. They use it the way it is out of the box. You're a perfect fit for the cloud. And then we have customers that have an insane amount of customization with 600 users and all these third party plugins, and they're relying heavily on their direct access to the database. That's not going to be a good fit for you not being able to control the entire environment. Once you get all that data in, though, the biggest thing is the testing and validation. And this is something that, I mean, I'm just being completely transparent, Matt. I feel like we struggle on this point right here is testing and validation. Is we deliver those test loads and the customer's like, yeah, this is fine, and then you go live and it's not fine because they didn't look at this, that, or the other. Now, I'm going to take responsibility for some of that. Some of that is you can't have the expectation that someone that's never been on P21 is going to know what to look for. So I think in a lot of instances, looking back, I feel like we should have told them specifically what to check.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that we've had internally recently here is, are we going to institute a more regimented, formalized sign-off process that you're telling us, yes, customers are good to go. Yes, vendors are good to go. Yes, this is good to go. Because I in a lot of I hate that kind of bureaucracy. I really do. But I also feel like there has to be a shared responsibility between what we do and what the client's doing to for them to say, okay, yeah, this is the army we're going to war with because it's really important. I don't want to be chasing down problems that were extremely avoidable before go live, and
Right.
we just didn't because no one ever looked at it. I don't like that at all. Um, and that is a here it comes. That's a big pitfall in the landmine, right? And that is how we kind of want to wrap this up with the little bit of time that we have left is talking about where do we see customers really struggling and making unforced errors. We call it stepping on a landmine or whatever. It's not going to kill you, but it could definitely take a leg. Um, Number one on my list, realistic expectations. I mean, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Well, I mean, especially if you're coming to if you're paying a third party, whether it's us or somebody else, or going directly with Epic or whoever you're using, if you're paying them to give you feedback and they tell you X, Y, and Z, believe them because
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously need help, so you're asking for help. Um, the timeline is the big one for me. Um, you
Well,
know,
okay. Let's talk real world.
yeah,
We received an email from an existing client last week, late last week. They just did an acquisition. They want to pull off a data conversion in 30 days. Now, our first inclination is no way that can be done. But our thought process was, okay, well, look, we know not all of these are created equal. This could be an extremely bare bones thing. It could be we just need to get this, and this, and then we're good to go. Whatever. Well, it turns out from us, really all they wanted was the extraction. They were going to handle all the transformation and load. So can we complete our part in a week? Probably. I mean, we gave, fortunately, it's a system we've extracted from before. We already have a good start point for it. We were able to give them the prerequisites of these things would have to be in place before we could even do it. So, can our part be completed in a timely fashion? Sure. Can theirs? I don't know. I mean, again, it depends on the volume of data,
right.
how complete you're trying to be, this, that, and the other. So, I don't remember how I worded it, but I was like, it was something to the effect of we're not going to say no. What we want to say is let's understand what it is you're actually trying to do, and then we can tell you whether or not we think that's achievable based on our experience. I would
I would,
go
yeah.
ahead.
I was
No,
gonna say
go ahead.
I would much. I learned, and unfortunately, a lot of people haven't learned this many many years ago, that I would much rather be brutally honest up front than to tell somebody what they want to hear, whether it's my boss or a customer, knowing in the back of my head I'm going to have to disappoint them in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Because if you do that, then that looks worse to me, and it's just a crappy feeling. Now you can tell them, and they can still go, "Yeah, we're still going live in 90 days." You've at least told them that you don't think that's possible
Yeah,
because of X, Y, and Z.
right.
Um,
That's for us, Matt. I've always felt like that's one of the benefits of us getting to be who we are. We have no formal affiliation with anyone, and when we contract with a client, we're contracting with that client, and there's no predispositions about other pieces of software or anything else. Our job is to advocate for our client and help them make the right decision for them, and then once they've made that decision, to execute on it, as General Patton would say, violently. and and that has been a lot of different things. That has been, we understand we're not a fit for the cloud, we're going anyway. Okay. That has been, we've been on P21 for 3 years. It's killing our business because we're just not big enough to take advantage of it. We need to get off P21 and we need you to help us do it. Okay. If that's the right thing for you, we work for you. And so I think, to Matt's point of being able to give that honest feedback and say, this expectation you're setting is not realistic. I think that's important. And it's not always what people want to hear, but it's what you need to hear. And really that leads right into the next thing that we see that is constantly a problem, which is the arbitrary go live date. It's the go live date that is not based in any type of reality. There's no project schedule that says this is how long we think cumulatively all these tasks are going to take. And so we're setting a go live date of this. No, this is, yeah, we could do this in 6 months.
well, I mean, how many times have we had people come and go, "Oh, our go live date is X, Y, and Z," and it's like, but you're just now starting to have the conversation about this process,
Right. Yeah.
like because even with the best intentions and doing all this groundwork, there's a good chance your go live date's going to get pushed.
Multiple
It,
times.
and that's okay, right? Like that's part of the process. It happens to a lot of people. I mean, I came from a place where it got pushed 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Now, granted, COVID happened in the middle of it, so that kind of complicated all that. Um, but you know, just don't throw a dartboard at a calendar, or
Yeah,
throw a dart at a calendar.
yeah, it just doesn't work. And the here's what, if you're doing that, this is what you may not realize that you're doing. You're demotivating the team that's responsible for delivering on it. Once you start with something that's in la la land and has no basis in reality, everyone is immediately demoralized. Um, I learned something a long time ago because we hear a lot of this. I mean, like I should have a psychiatrist couch in my office, right, or a virtual one or something, because um, people will tell consultants that they stuff that they will not tell their own executive team. They frequently will vent frustrations. A lot of our job is helping people keep a positive outlook and say, hey, look, we're gonna get this done. It's a mess. We're gonna have a lot of trials and tribulations, but at the end of the day, we've got a project to deliver, and we're gonna help you figure out how to deliver it. But all of those frustrations and all of those ups and downs and good and bad, all of that comes through, and we see arbitrary go live dates demoralize teams just worse than anything. It's really bad. um you know i, I would also say having too many cooks in the kitchen is a problem. I think you used that turn of phrase earlier, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really good one. Where there's so many people trying to make decisions, or everything is decided by consensus or committee and nothing gets decided. And I can remember one that we did where we were bringing 6 or 7 companies together into a single P21. And at the outset, the senior management said, no, we're going to rationalize system settings. Everyone's going to live on the same set of system settings, and that's the way it's going to be. But they didn't enforce that.
Yeah.
And so what we ended up with was 200 business rules trying to overcome all these problems because no one could agree on anything. And no one was being forced to agree to anything. And it
Right.
was really, really, really tough.
Well, and you also have people from their point of view and their position. I love my accounting friends, um, but their decisions and their input always come from the accounting point of view,
Yeah.
right? Which a lot of times that can play into that arbitrary go live date. Oh, well, our month end is this date. It has to be this day. And it's like,
Right.
um, but yeah, the enforcing of it, that's a really good point because we ran into that through ours, where this is the decision we're making. We all agreed this is the best path forward. And then 3 weeks later, Slim is like, no, we're going to go this way. And then everyone went, all right, well, we're changing it.
Yeah.
And again, not saying things won't change because you can do all the planning you want and all that, but there will be things that you learn more and you go, oh, wait, this really is. We don't like lots. We hate lots. We don't want to use lots.
Yeah.
And, which that, again, that's a whole nother conversation, um, which I think we've had already, actually. So, anyway, so yeah,
Comes up a lot.
it goes all the way back to the pre planning. Build a good team. Not everybody has to agree on everything, but somebody at the end of the day has to take all these ideas and go, okay, there's not a perfect decision for this toggle, but we think this is the 80% best way for us to go.
Yeah. And part of it is like, and this is the decision we never see anyone make. And it's really strange to me because we had to make it on our own P21 implementation, and it was not comfortable for me, but it had to be done. I had set a go live date of December 27th, 2021. Is that right? Is it
Yeah, because
21
I
or
came in
22?
2022.
Yeah, okay. December 27th, 2021. That was our go live date. Why? Because
You hate Christmas?
no. I set it for that date because it was the best lull in our business
Yeah,
to hit.
yeah,
There was no better date than the week between Christmas and New Year's to get this done.
yeah,
And so that was my date. It wasn't arbitrary. I had a business decision for it. It was going to cause the least amount of disruption to ongoing operations. And we got 30 days out from that date, and there was no way we were going to make it. We had 3 major projects that were not ready that we needed.
yeah.
And so what did we do? We cut the scope of those 3 projects and picked some things that we were just going to have to go live without. And
Yep.
I understood that, and I understood it was going to be a little bit more painful, but it was going to be more painful to try to go live in the middle of spring when everybody's trying to get all of their projects off the ground. And
Right.
that's what
It's
we did,
keep it behind the curtain, right?
Yep,
Because if you would have pushed it to spring, all of our customers would have felt it.
every bit of it. And so we made the decision to reduce scope. And we don't see that happen very often, but it's a valid way to do it. So
Yeah.
those are kind of like, those are like the main like project stuff, but then there's some technical stuff that we see that are landmines. Um, the biggest one for me is consistency from one data load to the next.
Mhm.
Where it came in one way the first time, then it did something completely different the next time, and something completely different the time after that, and you have no. It's like now I'm wondering what's it going to look like when we really go live, and this is why, like in our process, we're doing loads. By the time we go live with somebody, we've probably loaded customers 50 times,
Mhm.
so we know it's going to be the same every single time. That is a big one. You've got to take the actual loading of data for the go live event should really be a non-event. It should have been practiced so many times that there's no question it's going to be okay.
Yep.
And then I think the last big technical one really, and this goes back to our friends in finance, is the accuracy of open transactions. Open sales orders, every open line came over. It was the only the open quantity. Same with POs. Um, the inventory value is correct. The inventory costs on all the items or at the lot level if that's what you're doing, since we seem to want to mention lots a lot very often today. Lots a lot. Uh, those things, your open AR, that's a big one. That's very
Yeah.
customer
Yeah.
facing. If I had to pick between perfect open AR and perfect open AP, I'd take AR every time. I'll figure it out with my suppliers,
Right.
but I don't want my customers to feel this. I just don't. That's kind of where I am. So, yeah, I just wanted to get those in there as well because I know we're trying to keep this around an hour, but those I thought
I,
were really
I
important.
had one more landmine I want to throw in there real quick, and it's
Yeah,
going to seem counterproductive considering who we are.
yeah,
Um, don't if you can, don't go into the system trying to customize it to make it 100% your old legacy system.
oh yeah,
There we know there are obviously going, just like everything, there are business cases why we have to have X, Y, and Z possible in P21. Cool, let's handle those. But don't go, because 8 to 12 months into P21, you're going to realize what you need customizations on.
yeah,
So save yourself some money up front and some headache up front, because the more customizations you do, like Andy said, with our P21, which we are P21 customers, I always like to throw that out. He had to make some decisions. He had to say, "Look, we have to go without this." Um, so just be mindful of how much you want to modify your system right out the gate.
yeah. Because I can think of 2 implementations that we probably wrote 50 to 80 business rules for each implementation, and within 6 months, half of them were shut off because they were unnecessary.
Yep.
And the shame of it is, in a lot of cases, we told them that up front. Like, look, I don't really think you're going to need this based on what you're telling me. No, 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 we got to have it. Okay. Well, they didn't. Or, oh, we're going to implement these types of controls when we go to P21, even though culturally, as a company, they didn't have any of that. And it's like,
Yeah.
now you're going to try to change systems and culture at the same time. That's not going to happen. Within 30 days, those features were shut off, which that's just sunk money, and we hate to see it. Again, we love making money. Don't get me wrong, but we also ultimately want our customers to be successful, and we want anybody going through this process, even if they're not our customer, to be successful at it. And this is just our experience of what we see that we think would make it easier if people went into it with a more realistic expectation of how it's going to go. So,
Yep.
Matt, I don't have anything else, man. I think that pretty much covers it. I can't believe we made it through the whole thing in an hour and 4 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
pretty good. That's pretty good. So, hey, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for sticking with us. We're hoping to do more in this format. And, we'll put a link to our website in the description and maybe in a pinned comment below. And we will see you guys on the next episode.